Your case doesn't travel as luggage." The stagecoach driver said it the way men say things they've already decided, flat and final, not a conversation but a verdict. Lenora Vick stood on the step of the coach with one hand on the doorframe and looked down at him. "It is personal luggage," she said. "It belongs to me." "It's a crate." He didn't look at her. "It's a case, 18 inches by 12. Smaller than the bag behind the gentleman in the second row." The driver, stocky, sun-weathered, answered to Briggs according to the station master back in Pueblo, finally looked at her, and the look said what his words hadn't quite gotten to yet, that the distinction between crate and case was not the point. The point was that a woman traveling alone to a mining territory with a piece of equipment he didn't recognize made him uncomfortable, and discomfort in a man with authority tends to become policy on the spot. "Extra freight, $2 or it rides outside. My ticket covers personal effects. My coach covers what I say it covers." He pointed at the road. "You want to argue about it, argue with the dust." Lenora looked at the other passengers. A merchant in a wool coat who had been sleeping since Pueblo. Two women traveling together who had smiled at her once and were now studying their laps. A cattle buyer from Denver who had already told her twice that Colorado Territory was no place for a woman on her own. Nobody said a word. She picked up the case and her traveling bag and stepped down from the coach without slamming the door. She closed it exactly as hard as it needed to be closed. And she stood in the road and watched the coach go and did not call after it and did not cry, because the time for crying about this particular kind of thing had passed somewhere around age 17, when she'd learned that crying in front of people who expected you to cry was the one luxury she couldn't afford. The station was a single building and a hitching post and a water trough. The station master had already gone back inside. The road going east showed her nothing in either direction but its own empty length. She set her case down and sat on it, and did what her mother had taught her. She listed what she had. One traveling bag, intact. The case, which was the whole reason for this particular indignity, housing her personal telegraph set. A Bunnell key and sounder her mentor at the Cincinnati Western Union office had given her the day she passed her certification. A letter of employment from the Gravel Springs Territorial Telegraph Company, signed by a man named Orrin Aldous, offering her the position of station operator at $16 a month, $32 and some coins in the pocket of her coat. A wool blanket she'd packed because people who'd been to Colorado told her the nights were cold even in June, which she'd dismissed as dramatic and now was grateful for. 2 days of hard travel still ahead of her. What she did not have, a horse, water beyond what she'd drunk at the last stop, any knowledge of the road between here and Gravel Springs. She added to the list mentally, stubbornness. Her grandmother's word for it said as a compliment, which Lenora had always appreciated. She picked up her things and started walking. The road was packed dirt that loosened into sand at the edges, and the elevation was already higher than anything she knew from Ohio, and her lungs noticed. She walked steadily and counted her breathing and thought about the telegraph office in Gravel Springs, about the first message she'd send when she arrived, to her brother Casper, who was the only person in Cincinnati she'd told where she was going. She was thinking about water when she heard the wagon. It came from behind her, from the west. She stepped to the side of the road, the way a woman traveling alone in unfamiliar territory learns to do, visible but not exposed, present but not positioned as an invitation. The wagon that came around the low bend was a working rig, 2 roans, road steady, canvas cover, weathered, tools in the wagon bed organized with the practical logic of someone who used them daily. The man on the seat sat straight, which meant he wasn't tired. He slowed when he saw her. He stopped. He was perhaps mid-30s, lean in the way of outdoor work rather than scarcity, with a hat that had done actual service and a jaw that had met a razor since at least Tuesday. He looked at her from the driver's seat with an expression that was plain and steady, neither pitying nor calculating in the way she'd learned to watch for. "Ma'am," he said, "you all right?" "Yes," she said, "thank you." He looked at her bags. He looked at the road east. He looked at the sky in the way of someone reading information rather than admiring scenery. "You get put off the stage?" "I left the stage," she said, which was accurate enough. He nodded, one slow movement that acknowledged the gap between what she'd said and what had happened, and didn't press it. "Where are you headed?" "Gravel Springs." He was quiet for a moment. One of the roans exhaled, a long, low breath with editorial quality. "That's 14 miles," he said. "I'm aware. There's maybe 2 hours of decent light left." "I'm aware of that, too." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then, I'm going through Gravel Springs. I can take you, or I can keep going if you'd rather." He said it simply, not with the weight of a favor being performed, not with any implication that she owed him for asking. He said it the way someone holds a door. "Here it is. Take it or not." Lenora assessed what she knew: the road, the light, the water she didn't have, the 14 miles, the man on the seat who had not yet done a single thing to justify distrust. "Thank you," she said. "I'll accept." She lifted her own bags into the wagon bed without waiting for him to offer. She noticed the small pause before he settled back on the seat. Not offense, she thought. More like adjustment. She climbed up without ceremony. He clicked to the horses and they moved. For a while, neither of them said anything. The road unrolled ahead of them in the thinning light, and Lenora used the silence the way she used most silences, to observe. The wagon was well kept, the leather traces in good repair, a rifle under the seat, oiled and mounted in a bracket not decorative. There was a crate in the wagon bed with a paper tacked to it. Dunne, Gravel Springs. That was his name then, or close enough to it. "I'm Lenora Vick," she said. He glanced at her sidelong. "Sawyer Dunne, rancher." "The wire to your post office or to the general store?" He looked at her more directly now. "The crate," she said. "The address on it." "Post office," he said. "Harlan Goss runs the general store and charges a handling fee for every package that passes through. I'd rather walk the extra block." Lenora filed that away. A storekeeper who charged handling fees on every transaction. That was the kind of detail that meant something in her experience. You learned to notice the small extractions. "What takes you to Gravel Springs?" he asked. "Employment. I'm a telegraph operator. Orrin Aldous hired me to run the station." Sawyer was quiet in a way that had texture to it, not uncomfortable, but specific. "You know Aldous?" she asked. "Everyone in Gravel Springs knows Orrin Aldous," he said, and did not add what they knew him for, which was itself a kind of information. "Is there something I should know?" He seemed to weigh it. "Then he means well, he's just not organized." Lenora considered this. In her experience, not organized was a phrase that covered a range of situations from mildly inconvenient to actively chaotic. "The driver put me off," she said, after another mile had passed. "He called my telegraph case extra freight. My ticket covered personal luggage, which is what it is. He was wrong, and he knew it, and he did it anyway because he could." Sawyer didn't respond immediately. The horses kept their pace. "That happened to you before," he said. "Being told you're wrong when you're not." She looked at the mountains, going purple in the distance. "Often enough that I've stopped being surprised by it," she said. "I haven't stopped finding it inefficient." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but in the same county as one. "Inefficient," he said. "It wastes everyone's time, including his." He looked at the road ahead. "That's the most practical way I've ever heard anyone describe that particular situation." He said it simply, without performance. Like most things he said, she would come to understand. They were 9 miles from Gravel Springs when the left rear wheel found the rut. Sawyer felt it before she did. His hands tightened on the reins and he said one word, low and quiet, that she chose not to repeat. Then he pulled the horses to a stop and was down from the seat before the wagon fully settled. Lenora climbed down without being asked. She looked at the wheel. The spoke was cracked through. Not catastrophic, but not something to push 14 miles on a dark road. "How bad?" she asked. "Can't risk the weight on it in the dark." He looked at the sky. "We stop here tonight. I've got camp supplies. You take the wagon bed, I'll take the ground." He said it without making a point of it, without the particular emphasis men use when they want credit for the obvious courteous thing. "All right," she said. "I'll manage the fire if you handle the horses." They worked without needing to negotiate it. She had a fire going by the time he'd unhitched and watered the animals. He found the coffee pot. She found the tin cups. By the time full dark settled, they had fire and coffee, and the particular competence of 2 people deciding to handle an unexpected situation without requiring it to be anything other than what it was. He made food, salt pork and dried corn, plain frontier fare. She ate it without comment on its plainness, because plain food when you haven't eaten since midday is simply food. "You came from Cincinnati," he said. "Yes." He waited. He had the quality of someone who understood that waiting was itself a form of attention. "I needed distance," she said. "The position in Gravel Springs was the first one I found that was far enough." "Far from what?" She looked at the fire, an arrangement I was expected to be grateful for. I wasn't. He nodded. He didn't ask what kind of arrangement. He poured more coffee into her cup without checking whether she wanted it, which she did. She watched him across the fire. His face in the firelight had the quality of a man who had been through something and had come to terms with it rather than past it, which she recognized as different from being over it. "Your ranch," she said. "How long?" 8 years. Bought the land, broke, built it piece by piece. He was quiet for a moment. Had a wife the first 3 years she passed, fever. He said it the way people say things they've said enough times that the words have gone smooth, not without weight, just carried a long time. "I'm sorry," Lenora said, and she meant it not as a phrase to fill silence, but as a plain fact. "It keeps you honest," he said. "Loss does. You stop taking the ordinary days for granted." She sat with that. The fire settled. Above them, the sky was crowded with stars in the way she'd only read about in letters from people who'd gone west, and she'd dismissed as poetry. She revised her opinion. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. She meant the ride, the camp, the fire, all of it. He understood the full scope of the question. She could see it. "Because you were on a road alone at sundown with 2 bags, he said. "Because someone should have done something before it came to that, and they didn't." He looked at the fire. "My father used to say that how a man treats a stranger when there's nothing in it for him tells you more about his character than anything else he'll ever do." He shrugged, one shoulder. "I remembered that." Lenora was quiet for a moment. "He raised you well," she said. "He raised me honest," Sawyer said. "Close enough." She thought about that for a long time before she slept. In the morning, he had the wheel repaired before the light was fully up, working with the focused economy of someone who'd done it before and didn't need commentary on the process. Lenora rebuilt the fire and made coffee and thought about what she knew and what she didn't. What she knew. She had a position in Gravel Springs with a man named Orrin Aldous, whose name Sawyer Dunne had spoken with careful neutrality. She knew Gravel Springs was 9 miles ahead. She knew Sawyer Dunne was a man who treated her with plain decency because that was simply how he was, not because he expected anything for it. What she didn't know. What she would find when she arrived. She was about to find out. Gravel Springs announced itself the way frontier towns did. Not gradually, but all at once, a cluster of buildings appearing out of the land as if set down rather than grown. Main Street was unpaved and direct. A general store, a hotel, a livery, a doctor's office, a land office, a saloon, a church at the north end. And where the telegraph station was supposed to be. A lot with scorched posts and the smell of old fire. Sawyer had gone quiet beside her on the wagon seat. "When?" she said. 3 weeks ago, he said. "I heard about it before I left town. I didn't know how to tell you when I didn't know you." She sat with that. 3 weeks ago. Before she'd left Cincinnati. Before she'd packed her case and bought her ticket and told herself she was finally going somewhere that would have room for what she was. While she'd been counting down the days to a fresh start, the place she was starting fresh at had burned. "Does Aldous know I was coming?" she said. "I'd guess so." "Then why didn't he write to stop me?" Sawyer didn't answer, which was an answer. "Not organized," she said. "No," he said, "he's not." A woman came out of the dry goods store and stopped on the boardwalk, looking at the wagon with the frank appraisal of someone who'd decided long ago that subtlety was a waste of effort. She was perhaps 55, solid through the shoulders, with gray threaded through dark hair and the bearing of a woman accustomed to knowing things. "You the telegraph operator?" she called. "I am," Lenora said. Figured. Saw the case. The woman came down to the street. "I'm Vera Stagg. My husband runs the livery. You got a name?" "Lenora Vick." "Come inside, Miss Vick. I'll put coffee on and tell you what you've walked into." Lenora looked back at Sawyer. He was already climbing down to handle the horses. She followed Vera Stagg inside. The coffee was good, better than camp coffee, which she didn't mention, And Vera sat across from her at a work table and folded her hands with the directness of a woman who respects other people's time. "The station burned 3 weeks ago," Vera said. "Aldous had a habit of leaving the oil lamp burning when he stepped out. Nobody was hurt, but the building's gone and the equipment with it. He's been trying to find money to rebuild. So far, he's found mostly excuses." "The company in Denver contracted the position," Lenora said. "They have to honor it." "They have to honor a lot of things," Vera said. "Whether they do is a separate matter." Lenora set her cup down. She didn't speak for a moment, which was its own kind of response. "Is there any wire work in Gravel Springs at all?" she said finally. "The land office, the hotel, any business that handles written correspondence." Vera looked at her carefully. "You're not going back east." "I have no particular reason to," Lenora said. "I came this far to be far enough. The distance hasn't changed." Something in Vera Stagg settled. Not quite a smile, but the expression of one competent woman recognizing another's quality and finding it satisfactory. "Harlan Goss at the general store has been handling the town's incoming wire transfers through the receiver at the hotel," Vera said. "He's not trained. He's been making errors for 3 weeks and charging people for the privilege." She paused. "And Rupert Dell at the land office has been asking for someone to manage his correspondence and records for 2 months now. Dell's not dishonest, just overwhelmed." "What's the pay at the land office?" Vera named a number that was fair. Lenora calculated against her $32. It would hold her while she pressed Denver about the contracted position. The door opened and Sawyer Dunne came in. He read the room the way she'd seen him read weather. "Aldous didn't write her," Lenora said before he could ask. He looked at her. "No," he said. "I know." The word came out with more edge than she'd fully intended. Not quite accusation, but in the vicinity of it. "You could have told me what you'd heard." He met her gaze and held it. "I should have," he said. "I didn't want to tell you something I wasn't certain of, on a dark road when there was nothing you could do about it. That was the wrong call, and I know it." He said it straight. No hedging, no deflection. The apology of a man who didn't offer them casually, which made them worth something. "Yes," she said. "You should have, but I understand why you didn't." Vera observed this exchange, with an expression that suggested she was filing everything away. "She's staying," Vera told Sawyer, as though reporting a weather condition. He looked at Lenora. "I have 2 ranch hands who can't write their names," he said. "I've been managing their wage records myself because I haven't found anyone to trust with it. Fair pay, flexible hours." He said it the way he said most things. Plain, undecorated, take it or leave it. Not telegraph work, but it's work. "I'll need a room in town," Lenora said. "My own accommodation." "Vera rents rooms," Sawyer said, which surprised no one. "Clean and reasonable," Vera confirmed, with the efficiency of a woman who had already thought this through before anyone asked. "Then I accept," Lenora said, "temporarily while I pursue Denver about the contracted position." "Temporarily is fine," Sawyer said. He didn't smile, but something in his face settled, a quiet rightness, the look of something arriving at the place it was supposed to reach. Gravel Springs was small enough that Lenora knew every face within 3 days and every name within 5. By her second week, she'd taken over the hotel's wire correspondence, corrected 3 weeks of Harlan Goss's errors, which Goss received with the specific displeasure of a man caught at something but unable to say so directly, and organized Rupert Dell's land office records into a system that actually reflected reality. It was in the land office records that she found the problem. She found it the way she found most things, by reading everything twice and comparing what should match. The parcel deed transfers for the past 14 months showed a pattern. Small fees collected at each stage of a land transaction, routed through the Gravel Springs post office before being forwarded to the county seat. The fees were legitimate. The amounts reaching the county seat were not. The difference, small on any single transaction, consistent across every single one, traced back to one name, Harlan Goss, who ran the general store and served as the town's unofficial postmaster, and who had been in a position to skim a modest invisible margin off every deed recorded in Gravel Springs for over a year. She put those documents in a separate stack and kept working. When Sawyer came to pick up the ranch wage records 2 days later, she showed him. She turned the relevant pages toward him and waited. He set his coffee cup down and read through everything twice, slowly, with the focused attention of a man who doesn't read things twice unless he needs to be certain. "How much total?" he said. "Over 14 months, across the whole town, more than $300. He looked up at her. "You're certain?" "The pattern is consistent," she said. "A mistake is inconsistent. This isn't a mistake." He was quiet for a long moment. $300 touched every family in Gravel Springs that had bought land, sold land, transferred a deed. Real money, not catastrophic, but real. "How do we handle this?" he said. "Not what do you want me to do, but how do we, as if the work were shared, which she noticed and which she felt." "We take it to Sheriff Breck with full documentation," she said. "I'll prepare a formal summary, every transaction, every discrepancy, every date, with Goss's counter-signature on each receipt. He signed them himself. He can't claim he didn't know." "You want to be there," Sawyer said. "It's my work," she said. He nodded once. The meeting with Sheriff Breck happened on a Thursday morning, Lenora's summary on the desk between them like a quiet detonation. Goss came in with the confidence of a man who'd talked his way out of things before and expected to do it again. He stopped talking when he saw the documentation. "Bookkeeping inconsistencies," he started. "Small transactions over a long period." "Are consistent," Lenora said, "which is precisely what makes them not inconsistencies. I've documented each one. The amount collected at the point of transfer, the amount forwarded to the county, the difference, the date, and your countersignature on the receipt." She held his gaze without blinking. "Errors are random. This is not random." Goss looked at Sawyer. Sawyer looked back at him with the flat, unhurried patience of a man who has already decided where he stands and does not plan to move. Sheriff Breck, who had been reading the summary with the meticulous attention of a man who didn't want to miss anything, set the page down and looked at Goss. "Harlan," he said, "I've known you going on 12 years. This is thorough work." He said it to the room, or perhaps specifically to Goss, who needed to understand what thorough work looked like. "You'll make it right." Goss looked around the room at three people who were not offering the negotiation he'd come prepared for. His expression went through several small calculations and came out the other side. "I'll make it right," he said, and it cost him, which Lenora suspected was appropriate. Outside afterward, Sawyer and Lenora stood in the street, in the particular way of people who've concluded something difficult and are deciding what to do with the rest of the afternoon. Sheriff Breck paused on the boardwalk. "That was thorough work, Miss Vick," he said, the compliment of a man who gives them rarely and means them when he does. He tipped his hat and went back to his office. Lenora and Sawyer stood in the street. $300, Sawyer said. $312, she said. "I'll watch to make sure it comes back. Every dollar of it." "Of course you will," he said, and there was something warm in his voice, not performed, just present, the warmth of a man who has learned that what he says and what he means are the same thing, and who has found in her someone who operates the same way. She looked at him. He was watching the corner where Goss had turned. "This is what I do," she said, "finding the quiet numbers people hope nobody's looking at closely enough." "Lenora," he said. He used her name with the particular deliberateness she'd come to feel each time, like something clicking into its right place. "You came to this town 3 weeks ago with $32 and no job, and you just recovered more than $300 for people you'd barely met." $312, she said. He turned to look at her. His face had the quality it had in the firelight on the road. Fully present, nothing withheld, looking at her rather than through her. "You know what I mean," he said. She did. And she knew it too, that she was different from the woman who'd sat on a telegraph case at the side of a Colorado road and made a list to keep herself from unraveling. Not because Gravel Springs had done it, because whatever she'd always been had finally found a place with enough room for all of it. "Yes," she said, "I know what you mean." The man from Cincinnati arrived on a Monday. Vera Stagg found out about him before Lenora had finished her first cup of coffee. "Man named Alderman checked into the hotel last night," Vera said, refilling the cup. "Came in on the southern stage. He's been asking about you. Whether you were here, how long, who you worked for." Lenora set her cup down. Vera described him, 60s, well-dressed in the Eastern way that read expensive rather than practical, the bearing of a man accustomed to being listened to. Lenora knew who it was before Vera finished. His name isn't Alderman, she said. Or it might be. He uses several. He works for a man named Mortimer Hale. Hale is a railroad investor, my father's former business partner. He arranged my engagement to his son after my father's debts came due. I was the terms of their settlement. She looked at her cup. I left before any agreement was finalized. I signed nothing. But the debt remains, and Hale sent this man to make arrangements. Vera was quiet for a moment, receiving this with the focused stillness of a woman taking in a serious thing. "Can he make you go back?" Vera said. "Not legally. I signed nothing. I left before anything was binding." She paused. "But he can damage my standing here. He can suggest I'm a woman who abandoned her family obligations, that my father's debts are somehow mine to honor, in a town that's known me 3 weeks, versus a man with letters from a respected Cincinnati investor." She stopped. "Tell Sawyer," Vera said. "Yes," Lenora said, "I need to." She rode out to the ranch herself that morning. Sawyer was at the fence line near the barn, and she saw the moment he registered that her coming on a Tuesday, not her usual day, something had shifted. She told him straight, without softening it. The man from the hotel, Hale, the engagement, the debt, the reason she'd needed 1,400 miles of distance between herself and Cincinnati. Sawyer listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment with the expression she'd come to recognize as his version of serious. Not alarmed, not performing concern, just fully present and holding the weight of it without requiring her to manage it for him. "Can he force you back?" he said. "No, but he can make things difficult." She met his eyes. "He'll come here. He'll find out you're my employer. And he'll come to the ranch because he'll assume that gives him a point of leverage." "Does it?" She looked at him steadily. "No," she said. He nodded once. "Let him come," he said. "A man who comes into someone else's town to apply that kind of pressure doesn't know what he's walked into. Breck doesn't take well to it. Neither does this town." He held her gaze, plain and complete. "You're not alone in this, Lenora." She heard it, not just the words but the absence of conditions attached to them. She had spent enough of her life around people who offered support with fine print, implicit obligations, expectations of gratitude, help that came with a tally, that she had learned to listen for it. She heard none. The man from Cincinnati came to the ranch on a Wednesday. She was in the records room when she heard the unfamiliar horse, and she was at the door before he knocked. He looked at her with the expression of a man who expected a different version of this moment. A woman startled, off balance, grateful for his arrival, because it gave the situation a shape she could lean into. "Miss Vick," he said. "Mr. Alderman," she said, "or whatever today's name is, come in." She showed him to the main room and sat across from him with the table between them and her hands folded in her lap. He made his case, Hale's expectations, her father's obligations, the impropriety of her departure. He used the word responsibility 4 times. He had clearly found that word useful in previous versions of this conversation. "The arrangement was between my father and Mr. Hale," Lenora said. "I was informed of it after the fact, the way one is informed of a change in the weather, as though my own preferences were not a relevant variable. I signed nothing. I agreed to nothing. I left before anything was made binding." She held his gaze without wavering. "My father's debts belong to my father. I am sorry for his difficulty. I am not its resolution." He tried a different angle, what he could say, what questions he could raise, the fragility of a reputation built in only 3 weeks. The door opened. Sawyer came in without hurrying and closed the door with exactly the pressure required. He looked at the man from Cincinnati, and then at Lenora, and she saw him take in everything he needed in one glance. "I'll say this once," Sawyer said, and the flatness in his voice was not anger but something quieter and considerably harder to move around. "Miss Vick has been working honestly in this town for 3 weeks. She has friends here, she has standing, and she has the backing of people who don't take well to strangers coming in with threats about reputation." He held the man's gaze without blinking. "You go back to Cincinnati and tell Hale that Miss Vick is not available. If he has a legal claim against her father, that's a matter between him and her father. If he sends you back here, you'll meet Sheriff Breck before you meet anyone else. Are we clear?" The man from Cincinnati left. The sound of his horse leaving the yard was one of the better sounds Lenora had heard in a long time. She sat where she was and felt the particular physical aftermath of sustained tension releasing. Not dramatic, not collapsing, just the quiet unlocking of muscles that had been braced since early that morning. She sat with it and let it move through her and didn't try to manage it into something smaller. Sawyer sat down across from her in the chair the man from Cincinnati had been using. "You all right?" he said. "Yes." And then, because he'd earned the honest version. "That was the conversation I've been dreading since I left Cincinnati. I didn't know until just now how much weight it had." "You held it before I came in," he said. "I know, but it helped having someone at the door." He was quiet. Then Lenora. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "Do you?" She looked at him, across the table, across the months of ranch mornings and shared work and every plain honest word he'd ever said to her without decoration. "That the house has been quiet a long time," she said, "and it's not the same kind of quiet anymore." He held her gaze steadily. "Yes," he said, "that's what I was going to say." She sat with the weight of it, the completeness of it, the way he offered it without condition, without asking for any particular response. "I'm not a settled thing," she said. "Alderman will report back and Hale will calculate what comes next. My father's situation isn't resolved. I've been in this town 3 weeks." "I know all of that," he said. "I'm telling you anyway." She believed him, not with the naive faith of someone who hadn't been let down before, with the specific, hard-won recognition of a woman who had spent years identifying the difference between men who said things and men who meant them, and who was sitting across from one of the second kind. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. Denver honored the contract 2 months later, sending funds for a rebuilt station. By then, Lenora had been running correspondence for the land office, the hotel, and 3 private businesses long enough that Gravel Springs had stopped thinking of her as the woman Sawyer Dunne had brought in from the road and started thinking of her as the woman who'd caught Harlan Goss stealing from their deed transfers. The distinction mattered considerably. Hale sent no one else. Her father wrote in November, 4 pages, halting, honest in the way of a man, confronting what he'd actually done rather than what he'd told himself he'd done. He said he knew she hadn't signed anything. He said he would say so to anyone who asked. He said he hoped the people around her were good. He said her mother would have found what she'd done remarkable, and that he found it remarkable too, and that he had not always deserved to know her, and that he was glad he did. She sat in the telegraph station and read it twice and let herself feel the full weight of it without managing it into something smaller. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer, where she kept the ones that mattered and went back to work. She told Sawyer that evening. He listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "How do you feel?" "Not what does this mean, not what happens now. How do you feel?" "Like something I'd been carrying shifted," she said. "Not gone, just lighter than it was." He nodded. He understood the difference. He asked her to marry him in January, at his kitchen table, with coffee between them and the quiet of people who have run out of things to perform for each other. "I know what you've built here is yours," he said. "I know you didn't build it because you needed anything from me, and I'm not asking because I think you do. I know the difference between a woman who accepts because she's afraid, and a woman who chooses because she wants to." He held her gaze with the steady attention he brought to everything that mattered. "I'm asking because this table is less quiet with you at it, because you are the most precise and honest person I've ever known, and because being known by you, actually known, is something I didn't understand I was missing until I had it." He stopped. "That's everything I've got." Lenora looked at him across the table. The record she'd organized, the window facing east, the station 8 miles away with her name on it in paint she'd chosen herself. "The contract from Denver," she said. He blinked. "If I'd gotten the letter in Cincinnati telling me the station had burned, I wouldn't have come," she said. "Aldous being disorganized meant I got on the coach anyway. The driver being wrong about my case meant I was on that road on foot at sundown." She looked at her cup. "I've always thought Aldous deserved some credit for this." Sawyer stared at her for a moment. Then he laughed, full and unguarded and real, the laugh of a man who has forgotten to contain it. "Yes," he said, when he'd gotten himself together, "Aldous deserves considerable credit." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you. The station stays mine." "I never asked you to give it up," he said. "I know, I'm establishing it in advance." "Lenora," he said. "The station stays," she said. For as long as you want it, he said. Good, she said. Then yes. They married in April, when the mountains had finally permitted spring. The church was full, not because it was the social event of the season, though Vera Stagg had organized it to a standard that made that inescapably true, but because the people who filled it were people who had watched something real take shape and wanted to be present for where it arrived. Afterward, in the April light, Vera pressed Lenora's hands in both of hers and said without preamble, "I knew from the first morning." "I know you did," Lenora said. "You're going to be good for each other." "Yes," Lenora said, "we are." She meant it with full knowledge of what it required: work, honesty, the specific courage of remaining known to someone across all the ordinary days ahead. She was not afraid of any of it. She had crossed harder ground than this. The telegraph station on Main Street, Gravel Springs, opened every morning at 7 and closed at 6. There was a hand-lettered sign above the door, L. Vick Dunne, telegraph operator. She used both names depending on context, and no one in Gravel Springs found this remarkable, because they had long since stopped expecting her to fit whatever shape they'd prepared for her in advance. On a morning in the following spring, tapping out a message for the land office while the coffee went cold beside her key, Lenora thought about the woman who'd sat on a trunk by the side of a Colorado road and listed what she had. 2 bags, $32, a telegraph set, a letter for a job that no longer existed. She had not put on that list because she had not thought to, because she had not believed it possible. A man who would stop. She was still thinking about that when she heard his boots on the boardwalk outside, unhurried, steady, coming in the direction of the station. She didn't look up from the key, but she felt the warmth of it, the way she always felt him arrive, not with surprise, but with something quieter than surprise and more lasting. The door opened. He came in and sat in the chair near the window, the chair that had become without discussion the chair he used when he stopped by in the mornings, which had become without discussion something he did most mornings. He found his coffee cup empty, went to the stove, refilled both cups without asking. She'd told him once that asking interrupted her concentration, and he'd remembered and never asked again. She finished the message, tapped it out clean, and looked up. He handed her the cup. "Anything interesting this morning?" he said. "A cattle transfer from Pueblo," she said. "A notice about road conditions on the South Pass. A letter for the hotel." She paused. "Nothing remarkable." "Is that all right?" She considered it honestly, the way she tried to consider all honest questions. "Yes," she said. "I know the difference now between quiet that's empty and quiet that's full." He looked at her across the station, in the morning light, in the life she had built from the ground of a dirt road in Colorado territory, with $32 and a telegraph set, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided that being left behind was not the same thing as being done. "So do I," he said. Outside, Gravel Springs conducted its regular business, the livery, the land office, the street, the ordinary Tuesday, and the telegraph key sat ready on its table, and the woman behind it was exactly where she had chosen to be, which was the only place worth being at all.